Hello, Social 20. So, what we're going to talk about today is nationalism and national interest in the Middle East. We're going to look at how some of the pursuit of self determination ended up going for the Middle East and some of their involvement in the aftermath in the war. So in the years before World War I, the Arabs in the Ottoman Empire had a lot of problems from persecution from the ruling Turks. So during the war, Arab nationalism and the desire to kind of get away from them had been growing. They wanted some self-determination based on their own unique traditions, values, religion, language. And so their goal ultimately was self-government. They helped as well to kind of further this. They needed a bit of support in this. They were going to join the Allies in the war to try to defeat the Turks and Germany in the Middle East. And then the agreement was really that they were going to be promised an independent homeland. And the Allies had told them, we're going to help support, your sovereignty. And so part of their motivation was to help the Allies with the promise that they were going to be granted a little bit more independence. Unfortunately, okay, so this is Prince Faisal right here. Unfortunately, what Prince Faisal did not know is that Britain and France were secretly agreeing to divide up the Middle East, and they were going to actually try to what is called spread their sphere of influence. So United Kingdom and France were both heavily involved. This was also backed by Russia. We're going to be controlling the Middle East and kind of dividing it up amongst them. And so imagine how you would feel as someone who had helped the Allies win the war with the promise that you're going to have this independence, and then later to find out actually they had no intention of keeping their promise and they were going to actually use your land for their own gain. And so he tried to travel to Paris as part of the Treaty of Versailles peace talks to try to keep this promise to them, to try to get their needs kind of heard. But unfortunately, as we kind of seen before, when we're talking about the Treaty of Versailles, the nations were very concerned with their own problems and their own self-interest. So they had different concerns depending on where they were living and who was in control. And so it became very much a secondary matter. It was ignored and they weren't able to successfully have their promises kept. And so we saw that the United States, of course, was not involved in the war really until the end, but President Wilson was very much in support of the Treaty of Versailles and future peace. And so they had the intent, of course, of honoring this promise that they made to them. But ultimately, when we looked at the UK Prime Minister, and then we've got the French president, they were very much concerned with what was going to happen to their countries after the war. And of course, the concerns from the Middle East were very much on the back burner. But however, the Allies also started to realize after the war that there was a lot more demand for oil. And so they kind of realized the Middle East was very rich on this resource and it was going to be beneficial to them, especially economically, if they could actually control the Middle East and those countries around that area. So they were going to try to secure trade with them. They were going to have an interest in controlling them. And so ultimately, they didn't want to make their promise kind of, solid because it actually would have gone against their self-interest, their national self-interests. But Arab nationalists throughout the region were outraged. They were not happy with this. They were not going to accept this deal. They became even angrier. The UK put through something called the Balfour Declaration, which promised to set up a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was not a popular or well-received plan. And so Arab nationalists viewed all of these things as not only were they broken promises, but they were not even going to have any recognition for them helping the Allies in the war. And so a nationalist party, someone who's going to try to fight for separation, led by Mustafa Kemal, he set up a republic in Turkey. And they actually did manage to gain independence. So the new government refused to accept the European Peace Treaty and have the control over them, and they won independence for Turkey in 1923. So shortly after World War I. Turkey was also admitted to the League of Nations in 1932, so that interwar period in which they were trying to have some sense of collective security through the League of Nations the same year as Iraq and 6 years after Germany, actually. So that was just a very brief kind of overview about how the nationalism and the nationalist sentiment had been rising and how it had tried to be squashed by the European powers, and how they reacted to that. And I think that should be a little bit of an overview about nationalism in the Middle East during war times. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, check out our website, online.plrd.ab.ca, and visit us on Facebook, Prairieland Online Academy. You can find out all that's going on with Prairieland Online Academy.